This is the supercarrier Lincoln 16. This is in KSP 23.0.395. I'm using only MechJeb as far as mods go, and why will make sense probably already. So this is obviously the first one. You'll notice, of course, it's not shrouded. This is the first one I've made out of purely structural bits. And you see, despite the fact it's over 1,000 tons, it's held up by only 8 girders, or gantries, or whatever you want to call these. So it looks like if you're trying to make something big, these specific structural elements are the way to go. In a moment, you'll see the fully formed functional interior. Here it is, complete with the inline wheels, the batteries. It's going to carry monopropellant, but it will not have an RCS system. It's more efficient to just use inline wheels. But you'll notice the docking ports are all on. Everything is ready for this to be serviceable. However, of course, it's missing its shroud. And there's the shroud. At this point, you'll probably realize that the naming of the Lincolns is actually their saved file. So this is my 4th saved file. You notice, despite the fact that I've added the shroud, it can now stand on 12 gantries and be in one piece. You notice the engines are not touching the ground. This didn't go together quite as nicely as I had hoped, but it will be functional. And with those mainsails removed, which is indeed the plan, with its 32 atomic engines, it'll have about 10.5 kilometers of delta V, and that'll be delivered over an hour's worth of thrust. That should be quick enough that I can get out in one orbit. Of course, getting it to orbit requires a little bit more. We are now up over 3,700 tons and up to the 13th save file. But why this one is important is because this is the first one where everything is ready to go. If you're wondering why there's no game sound, well, that's because nothing would have triggered a game sound to this point. But as well, during any launch, this runs at about 2 frames per second, so for the video's sake, I'll be speeding it up 8 times, which would ruin the sound anyway. So, without further ado, the first actual launch attempt. Now, with this being sped up 8 times, it looks like I'm about real time. If you look at the counter in the upper left-hand corner, it's close. It's not bang on real time. It's a little slower than real time, but it's close enough for our purposes here. And yes, I did say slower. The fact that this looks like accelerating quickly is not an illusion. It may be huge, but it's fast. Indeed, the solid boosters are the primary reason for that. At launch, it would have had a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1.05. The 8 solid boosters only add about 40 meters per second. Oh, and this is why this video is not called the Lincoln 13. Now, tell me that isn't a spectacular fail. I hated how much time that I lost just to see this thing go up in smoke, but I love the fact that I got it captured, because that explosion was worth the time it took just to get it up there. But yeah, as I was saying, the solid boosters raised the thrust-weight ratio from 1.05 to 1.14. A little bit more practical. Given what I'm saying about the Lincoln 13, you can probably guess what happened to the 14 and the 15. How about that debris cloud, eh? And there goes the massive chunk left over. So here's the 14, and you'll notice, despite my attempt to fix the problem, exact same thing happens. Catches on, oh, but different enough to still be worth watching again. Like I said, it sucks to have lost those so far up into the launch, because that's 40 minutes in at 2 frames per second. But just to get those captured so that they could be in this video made it worth it in and of itself. Now the 15 made it a fair bit farther and didn't fail in anywhere near as spectacular a fashion, but it had a number of small failures, which well, it's already effectively crippled. I haven't realized this yet. But the way those boosters came off, they damaged one of the mainsails. And, well, one of the fuel lines to one of the mainsails. And you'll notice that it cuts out early, which makes this happen. And you see, we flipped right through the periapsis once already. Going through it again. At this point, the vehicle comes close to regaining control. Well, it does regain control eventually. But as you can guess, this amount of time spent burning in the wrong direction, well, you can understand why, once again, this video is not called the Lincoln 15. Now, for now, you can't see the problem, but the way I edited this this clip, it should jump ahead momentarily. Here we are. So this is just after the mainsails are removed. I knew that there was no way I'd get it into orbit with those mainsails still attached, but unfortunately, when it fires, it bursts a couple more points, including a very, very important fuel line, namely the main fuel line. All of the fuel pumps through one tank. There would be no way to control it if I used multiple tanks. So all the fuel pumps through one tank, and it was that tank that had a fuel line failure. But try again. Here we are, the Lincoln 16. The entire reason for the video, although most likely not the primary reason people will find their way here. I'm guessing those failures of 13 and 14 will probably get the most interest, because those were some epic failures. So we might as well talk about the 16. As I mentioned before, it has no RCS system. The control wheels, while they have a difficult time keeping it from spinning on ascent, they have no trouble actually steering the vehicle. And indeed, on ascent, so many of those engines are thrust vectoring. A lot of them aren't, but so many of those engines are thrust vectoring that keeping this thing going in the right direction isn't too much of a difficulty. Now, there is one thing to note about the previous versions. I didn't have the nuclear engines, or atomic engines, sorry, firing at liftoff. And that was because, if you're not familiar with it, they're very inefficient near the ground. However, if you saw in 15, the primary reason that it took so long to get the thing facing the right direction again was because it was still very top-heavy. So while I definitely want it to be able to be fueled up to the about 1,000 tons of fuel this can carry, so I can actually get the 10.5 kilometers of delta V that the design seemed to want to focus on, I had to take a gamble and decide to burn off more fuel than necessary early on in the fight. So those 32 nuclear engines, while they're doing almost nothing right now, they are firing along with all of the boosters, including the mainsails. Now, the SSRBs that I mentioned, they've already gone. We've already gone through all of these triple stacks of the largest fuel tanks. So each one of those was 3, so 3 times 8, 24? Yeah, 24 triple stacks of, 24 of the largest Rockomax fuel tanks is already gone. And pretty soon these side ones are going to come off as well. They are definitely a shorter stage. As far as the asparagusing goes, I do something different than a lot of people. I see most people when they asparagus, oh, you see Mach effects. I got Mach effects out of this. Most people when they asparagus, they'll take a large central rocket and attach rockets on the outside and have them go in. And I find this, well, not very practical, because then you wind up with just one engine powering one huge full booster tank. Now, on average, the regular engines, the mainsail and, the 215 thrust regular engine, they can carry up to 3 of their largest types of fuel tanks, their respective largest. After that, you get diminishing returns. However, if you start with like 1 or 2 with just 1 tank each, and have them in the middle, and put on the outside ones with 4 or 5, you burn through the outside fuel quicker, and when you're done, you still have the fuel of the small ones. And because of that, you get consistent thrust-to-weight ratios all the way through the boosting, and then fantastic thrust-to-weight ratios at the end. So it's the exact opposite. You just wind up with less fuel once you reach that fantastic thrust-to-weight ratio. So you can do it either way. You can tell my preference. Indeed, that's why in the middle you'll notice I have 8 on each side of the regular 200 and 215 thrust engines. They're going to be basically the last to go, other than the mainsails. All these larger tanks, which I understand the 8 large tanks that are going to go next, they have mainsails themselves, but there are 8 additional mainsails beyond those. They are the actual last to go. But these tiny little single tank boosters in the center, they go after the large tanks, and that way they provide their thrust throughout the entirety of the boosting stage and take advantage of the fuel. Now it's at this point that you're going to start seeing stages fall off a lot more rapidly, because the bulk of the fuel is gone. What are we at? The way that my post-commentary recording program works, I can't actually read these numbers all that easily. But I guess I could get closer to my television, but I'm good here. Indeed, I was originally shooting for a 130-kilometer orbit. I always shoot for orbits above 120 kilometers, because 120 is the fast travel point. So if you go with orbits above 120, you never have to worry about the time acceleration. You'd think that a ship like this, I would shoot for an orbit that's just barely in orbit. But it just makes sense just to get it up there quickly. Now, one thing I do want to check is for the sake of checking, once you see the apoapsis is way up there. I get an apoapsis of 130 while I'm still 75 kilometers down, to give you an idea of just how fast this thing got going. Once it circularizes to the point where it's an actual orbit, I'm curious what the actual weight is. Just for my own sake, to see myself just how much weight I got into orbit. However, the final number is going to be lower than that, because I'm going to circularize, and indeed MechJeb does miss the 130. It knocks it up to about 150, which is a design fault on my behalf as well, because well, it wasn't fast enough. If it was faster, it could have done 130 by 30, but it's also because of the glide plane. I started the gravity turn at 50 kilometers, and that's just because I didn't want the staging hitting it as it fell off. Obviously, we're not done yet. We are not out of fuel. This is just, it's done its gravity turn. Now it's just waiting for orbital insertion. I believe I have that terminology correct. But I believe it's at about 123 kilometers that it starts its orbital insertion. So momentarily. You'll actually see the frame ebb a little as it does. And indeed, the way that these struts connect, it means you have pieces left over, legacy bits that are left over after you've ditched everything you no longer need for space. There are bits that still stick out from the frame that are exclusively for attaching things to, including the gantries, which are the bits on the side. Those come off nicely and collide with each other. Gotta love that. But I am actually going to step closer to see what my vehicle weight is when I get a periapse that's actually legitimate. And I'm nowhere near that, so I can sit back down for a moment. This was really painful to watch when I did it. I mean, I look at the fuel numbers on the right, well, the entire time I was staring at them, and it was clear that it had enough fuel. The question, one of the questions was, did it have enough thrust? Was it actually going to be able to make an orbit before falling back down? And as I said before, it didn't make a good orbit. But look at all the debris it's left behind. I missed the staging of the outer mainsails. I didn't think that those would be necessary. Well, they weren't connected by fuel lines to the main supply anyway. They were out of gas, and that was that. No reason to keep carrying them. Still 200 kilometers below ground on the periapsis. Getting much closer now. So it's 80 that I'm looking for. Once the periapsis hits 80, I want to know my vehicle weight. No such luck. I couldn't read that. It looked like 900, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't 900. That doesn't make sense, given the final weight. And now it's circularizing. And given that the apoapsis went up to about 158, I figured rather than shrink that, I might as well just bring the periapsis up to that. Have it just under 160 kilometers, stable orbit. Why not? But here we are. It is most certainly in orbit. It's not yet a good orbit, but it is in orbit. One trick I like to tell people with ambiguously shaped vehicles in which it's difficult to tell what is up, you put lights along the spine on just the top side, and you can use them to tell which side is up. And you can see them there. That is up. Now you can also tell by referencing the nav ball, but if you're going with visual cues, now that won't be a big problem with this particular craft, because this craft will never be docking with anything. Anything that it has to rendezvous will be docking with it. Because I can't imagine ever making anything bigger than this. I've never seen anything this big other than the supercarrier I made back in 0.19, which when I got it up, I think it was 0.19, KSP version 0.19. It was 430 tons once in space. So there it is, the Lincoln 16, and of course, Thanks for watching.